We'll let people load in for a little bit and then we'll get started.
Cool.
You can just imagine them coming in, kicking their folding chairs by accident, looking for a place to sit, silencing their phones.
Putting coats on different chairs
Exactly.
and things like that. And yep,
Exactly.
getting their lattes ready to go.
That's right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Reader Meet Writer. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. I am the alumni author in residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and I'm also the 2019 recipient of the Pat Conroy Legacy Prize from SIBA. SIBA stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, and this is an organization that represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. So perhaps you found out about Stacy Flood's new book, The Saltfields, from one of those bookstores. Perhaps one of those bookstores are the reason you are joining us tonight. Regardless of the reason, if you are interested in Stacy's book, please purchase it from the bookstore that brought you to this event and continue to support our independent bookstores, whether you are on the East Coast of the United States or far, far away from us on the West Coast, where Stacy is joining us from this evening/afternoon. Normally, writers like Stacy would be on book tour. They might be down at Elliott Bay. They might be down at another bookstore there on the West Coast, but COVID has made that impossible. So we're doing the next best thing, and we're bringing you these events online through this format, through Reader Meet Writer. We have had such incredible support. We've been doing this for almost a year. We started doing this in July 2020, so it's been almost a year, and we've had dozens and dozens of writers in front of thousands of readers. So thank you all so much for supporting us. I hope you continue to support us. We'll have a bunch more events beginning up in May. We'll have a full summer. We'll have a great time. I will post later in the broadcast, or perhaps Nikki, if you could post the upcoming schedule, the link to the schedule on the Reader Meet Writer page so folks could see the events we have coming up in May, that would be fantastic. So tonight we have a very exciting event. We have Stacy D. Flood with us. Originally from Buffalo and currently living in Seattle, Stacy D. Flood's work has been published nationally and performed on stages nationwide, as well as in the Puget Sound area. He has been an artist in residence at DISQUIET in Lisbon, as well as the Millay Colony of the Arts, and he is the recipient of a Getty Fellowship to the Squaw Valley Community of Writers. His new novella is The Saltfields. Stacy, thank you so much for joining us. We'll really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, listen, can you tell us, without giving too much away, can you give us kind of a quick setup or kind of a quick synopsis of The Saltfields?
Sure. So it's about an individual coming from the South. It takes place in 1947, and they're leaving their home in the South as part of the Great Migration of a lot of African Americans up to the North. And this person gets on a train with a few other travelers. This person's name is Minister, and he's a former school teacher. And he gets on a train with a couple. Their names are Davinian and Lana, and also a soldier back from the war. His name is Carl. And as they travel up towards the New York area, some things happen on the way.
Yeah, quite a few things do happen. You could definitely say that. And we learn a lot about these characters. Minister is very clearly the main character, but these other three are by no means minor characters. And each of them represents a particular brand. Brand is the wrong word completely, but a particularly complicated African-American history in terms of the Great Migration, in terms of the reasons people leave the South. And I wondered if we could begin by talking about Minister Peters, what his history is. He's our narrator. He is not a minister. I love when he gets on the train and Carvel tells him, well, I knew a guy named Deacon who was kind of a jerk, so I guess your name doesn't really matter. That doesn't automatically make you a good guy. But can we talk a little bit about Minister? And, you know, people had a lot of reasons for fleeing the South during the Great Migration: racial terror, political disenfranchisement, lack of economic opportunity, all kinds of reasons. But but minister's reasons are, there are a multitude of reasons. This is a man who's had a lot laid on him. So can you talk about him as a character?
Yes, really, he's one who has had a lot of tragedy prior to his leaving for the North, and is really looking for a new horizon, looking for hope, which a lot of the people didn't as well who went forward. But as you mentioned, there were the economic reasons, a lot of racial terror that was experienced there. They were looking to escape, but at the same time, looking for their version of hope as well, their version of what the new world could, this new environment could present for them. So for Minister, it's a chance to escape the things that he's experienced there. And it's time for him to actually just move forward. And he believes that this is the way for him to do so. One of the themes that I wanted to actually go over with in the book was the idea of, again, hope through travel, the idea of the thoughts behind what a new destination can provide to you, and the idea of, as well, of there's no such thing as an empty room, right? You can remove people, you can remove furniture, you can remove light, you can remove air, but there's going to be a history there. And so that history can sometimes even go with you. And that history as well, if it's not fully realized, things will come in to fill that in as well. So Minister then takes this journey to try to eliminate a lot of those things from his life, and to think about things in a different way, with these other characters as well, either seeing through him or in a way actually being different aspects of that same travel for many other people.
I like what you just said about, travel means new hope, and travel brings possibility. And I love that you used, I didn't plan on asking this, but I love that you used the train car as kind of being resonant of humanity. Because these four people, really all they have in common is their race. They're from different walks of life. They're from different experiences. One's a soldier. One, Lana has these hopes and dreams of ending up in Paris. And Davinian is kind of this, rabble-rouser, slick talking guy. And Minister's kind of just bearing witness and fleeing with his own troubles. But I'm thinking about, how public transportation, you live in a big city. I've been in plenty of big cities. I don't live in a big city, but how public transportation oftentimes brings all of us together and makes all of us listen, witness, pay attention to each other. And I thought that was a brilliant way to complicate the portrayal of the Great Migration in a way that feels more realistic, that it wasn't just a homogenous reason for fleeing the South. I thought that was really interesting. I kind of lost you.
Okay, 1 second. How's that better?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Yes, and what I really wanted to do is again use these people who are caught in an environment in this train car, who perhaps would never have come into contact with each other or related in such a way that they have during this time. Another particular about the train that I really worked for what I wanted to accomplish was the idea of time. They are in this environment. They're close together. There's time in which they have to spend together, and they start to learn about each other in really subtle ways. And even though there are a couple of times in which they leave the train, a lot of what they learn about each other happens during that actual journey. So that's one thing that I really wanted to make sure that was focused and came out in the text, was the idea that these people, they may have a commonality in where they want to go. They may have a commonality in what they want to escape. They have a commonality in how they see things, but there are so many different ways in which they want to accomplish what it is that they're looking for. And at the same time, they may lean on each other to get that, because they think that there's a common ground in which they can relate from, or which they try to prove themselves through. So I want to make sure that actually
and I love what you just said about time. And I want to talk about your work as a playwright toward the end of this, if that's okay. But the unities of time and setting here were exacting. This is a train that is making stops. They get off the train. There's a ticking clock to get back to the train in a couple of instances. And so we are always aware of time. We're aware of this train being shot like a bullet from the south to the north, and it's going whether they're on it, they make it back, they're on the platform. And it felt very dramatic. It felt very unified in terms of an experience. And, reading it felt like a night at the theater because as a novella, it gives you that unity of an immersive experience. Which, were you thinking about that when you were writing it?
I was, and I really thought about, again, with a play, how scene work actually happens, where you want to think about what's going to happen for one scene to drive to the next. At the same time here, being that it's shorter, I really wanted to really feel encapsulating as a theater could be. Oftentimes when you're in a dark theater, there may be an uncomfortable moment, but because you're in the theater, you're there, right? You have to witness this moment. You have to experience it with the actors, with those who are around you. And I wanted to capture that as well within the text and to say, okay, you're in this car, you're with these people, you're in this moment. I want to keep people inside that moment for as long as possible until I actually got to the where things happen at the end.
And it's so funny you say that because there are several moments on the train where Minister is uncomfortable with what he's seeing, with what he's hearing, with what other characters are doing. And it is akin to being in a theater where something uncomfortable is happening on stage. We're all actors, audience, we're all one organism moving through the experience, and we can't break the organism. We got to stay in it no matter what's going on. And that's what being on a train is like.
Yeah, and I really like that as far as the power in theater as well, and the power, especially when you have something as compact, where you are in there with other people experiencing this uncomfortable moment, but you're there and you have to actually just either work through it for yourselves as well, about what you think about what's happened on the stage, what you may think about what's happening with these characters as well, and it actually just kind of work through that narrative yourself as it's actually happening and you're witnessing it. So yeah, I did want to make sure that I did capture that that small feeling, the closeness of all of them.
I want to tell folks watching, if you have a question for Stacy while we're talking about the novel, about his playwriting, about his research into the Great Migration, anything that I leave out, go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your question for Stacy. When you do, make sure you mention your name and your home independent bookstore, and I will ask him your question at the end of the show. Those are our favorite parts of the show because they are unpredictable, and it may be something that Stacy has not thought of yet, and it may be something that I have not yet thought about to ask. So please make sure you do that. I told you in the green room, in the virtual green room, that I was going to quote back some bits of the novella to you, and I hope I don't embarrass you. But there's so much driving narrative here, especially once you get on the train and the tension rises, the tension falls, things are resolved, or not resolved necessarily, but it keeps moving. But you do such a great job of dropping in some beautiful sentences, some beautiful turns of phrase that remind the reader, okay, as much as this is carrying you along, slow down. This is some beautiful writing. Slow down and pay attention to the humanity of what these people are experiencing. And one of them that happens very early on that stopped me from reading, and I looked up from the book. It's a story that Minister is recalling of his grandfather. And we don't have to get into the story of the grandfather, but I want to talk to you about what it means, this line means for Minister. He died eventually, his grandfather. He died eventually, one way or another, whether as the result of one single incident or the weight of them all together. Can you talk about that in terms of the people in this book, specifically Minister? Not one single incident, but just the weight of them all together that makes them react or compels them to do desperate things, hopeful things, foolish things.
Exactly. And it's all of those things, I think is, and then like you mentioned, just the weight of not just one incident, but many. And whether it's terror experienced in many different ways, a lot of the just general disrespect for a lot of communities there, experienced in many different ways. So it's just not the one thing. Now, for Minister, things that happened to him early on in his life, as well as things that happened to him recently that makes him come to this decision to actually move forward. For Carvel as well, there are things that happened as well with him and inside the war that makes him actually take this decision as well. And for Valana and Davinian, it's that type of hope, but it's not the one disappointment. It's not the one tragedy. It's not the one incident that actually drove a lot of these individuals, especially through the history that I was able to go through, that made them make this decision, because this was a huge decision. There's something that I mentioned as well, that oftentimes the people who actually went north didn't look back to those who were still down there. So a lot of people who made that journey made it on faith. So there was a reason for them to take that leap of faith, that things could be better than what they had there, and then making sure again that journey happened for them. So it's oftentimes, it wasn't just the one incident or the one piece of fear or the one idea of hope, but the idea that of all these things collected for us here in this location, no matter what we've experienced other, at least it'll be other, and perhaps better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure at least that came through with the novel, with the work. That yeah, for Minister, there are a couple of tragedies that happened with him just made him say, yeah, a couple of tragedies that just made him say, like, it's time for me to go. But when hopefully when people experience the other, they can also see that there are things that they are looking for or working against, even though they may not admit that to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to drive them towards getting to the next location. One of the things about Minister that really made him compelling to me as a character was the way in which he can interact with where he does interact with the others, and the others then fill him with what they expect. And that gives an opportunity for us to actually learn about these other characters, but at the same time, see how Minister reacts or doesn't. So we kind of learn about all of them. I wanted to make sure that all four of these main characters were rounded enough to have their good and their bad, right?
Sure.
They have their greatness about them, and at the same time they have some things that are some really big flaws. So but I wanted to make sure that I captured their humanity, and the humanity in the sense of also having that hope that they can achieve what they want in another location, if not at home, where they come from at home.
When I was reading this book, I was thinking about Black masculinity, especially in the work of writers like Ernest J. Gaines. I'm not sure if you know him, from Southwest Louisiana. And he had a story in a collection of stories called Bloodline. But the story is called, I think it's called Three Men. And it's three men who have been locked up in a jail cell. And it's three Black men. And the three of them are very different. But they each represent a different facet of Black masculinity or maleness, or however we want to describe it. And here you have three very different men who represent kind of different vantage points of the Black experience in 1946, I think is when the book is set. We have Minister, who's a teacher. He has lived a relatively domestic life despite the tragedy. We have Carvel, who is a soldier who wanted to kill Germans, who has his wounds from the war. And then we have Davinian, who is kind of a street smart, slick, sleight of hand guy. Were you thinking about those portrayals and the different challenges each of those men, no matter how good they are at being slick or being patriotic or being domestic, still wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough that they could stay where they were.
Yeah, so much of that hopefully does come through. So thank you for that. It was really about making sure that those aspects though are still also well-rounded for them. And there are some moments where Davinian may seem like they're a very slick person, but when he's alone with Minister, some things come out where it's like, I don't have to put on a show as much. But what all of them are trying to achieve is this idea of who they are supposed to be, and in different ways. With Carvel as a character, the war had changed him in a way that he didn't actually expect. That he expected there to be something there that didn't turn out to happen in the way that he expected it to happen. So that changed the way in which he saw himself, and he saw as well the others around him. As the teacher, Minister, oftentimes we'll look at things in a more of a colorful manner, or we'll look at things in more of a philosophical manner, but to also see how he can relate. And Lana being a person who kind of is, I think, just a character. When I first started out, she was definitely my favorite. The others actually came up, but she kind of sees through a lot of it. A lot of the masks that they want to have, a lot of the ideas that they want to at least project out to the world, and how she's able to see that, all right, here's the crack in that facade, and she takes some pleasure in pulling at that little thread as well.
She is definitely the oldest soul of these four travelers, and she is certainly the most observant and the most engaged with reality of the fronts these guys are putting up. Especially Davinian, she knows the score with him, but she's also, traveling with him.
Yep.
I want to go from that discussion of masculinity and the portrayals in the novella to a particularly terrifying scene that you render so deftly that the horror of it comes through us like an arrow and not a grenade. It's the scene where Ryland is driving Minister back to the train station, and something terrible has happened. And if you want to talk about that, that would be fantastic. But it reminded me of a quote earlier in the book where Minister is preparing to leave the South, and there's a line to the effect of, "People disappear in the South." And maybe they went north, or maybe something bad happened to them, or maybe they just disappeared. And I was thinking about that when Minister sees what he sees on that ride back with Ryland. Can you talk about that?
Yes, thank you. That idea was one that I really wanted to be centered in the book, was the idea of things disappearing. People are leaving either for good reasons, they moved on, but things just happening. And when I went through the histories that I went through to actually get some of the research here, was that idea of, just things just happened. People just disappeared. Things just occurred. And of course, for a lot of the African-American community, there wasn't an investigation into them. Things just kind of happened, and they went forth from there. So in that scene, what I wanted to do was just portray, one, how treacherous this small trip can be, how simple, it's a simple trip, but how treacherous at the same time it can be, but at the same time, how others would see it, how others then are affected by it or not so, right? They kind of go through it, and then towards the end of that one scene, there are some things that still happen, but are open, right? So the idea is that what kind of happens there, and how people relate to it as just being a part of what happens, and how oftentimes terror, injustice, and things like that are horrific when they're normalized. Right. Sure. When it just becomes, this is just the way things are. This is just what can happen. There's some fear from the place that these characters leave from to get that, but it doesn't. I didn't want to actually bring out how treacherous that journey was until they were actually on it, and to have both of these characters then, Ryland and Minister, then go through this journey, go through this trip. Both of them looking at it in a certain way, and just saying, just get through this, and then when we get back to where we are, everything will be fine, right? But if we just get through this, it'll be okay. And I really wanted to make sure that idea of again, things just happening that are unresolved. And at the same time, that hope of, if we just get through this journey, if we just get through this train ride, if we just get through this this tragedy, once we get through it, everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
And that idea of, again, the hope, when not that truly manifests itself in the way one expects, but it still oftentimes can be there.
Yeah, and it was a reminder for me, and I think for the characters as well, Minister primarily, that what he and Ryland see is so terrifying and terrorizing on the way back to the train station that it doesn't matter if you're a veteran. It doesn't matter how slick or street smart you are. It doesn't matter whether you're a teacher and a husband and a father. This is going to touch your life. And I think what you said just now was so profound about it being normalized. And if we can just get through this, then it'll be better. And if we can just get through this, it'll be better. I think, as Americans, we have a very, we are very practiced at saying that to ourselves. If we can just get through this, it'll be better. What drew you to writing about the Great Migration? Was it something, that you heard about growing up? Was it something you read in an article? Was it what made you interested in taking on a novella about the migration?
What really was about how little of it I heard about growing up, actually. And it was this, it was a big event. It was something that really happened that was really a big moment of transition for a lot of people and a lot of my family. But how little of it was actually discussed, how little of it was actually mentioned. It was just, oh, we just did this, and this is something we had to do, right? It was something that we actually got through. So just that idea of it, what that travel was, what it meant, again, for different people. Again, and talking to people, it just meant different things for everyone. So the idea that, again, as you mentioned earlier, it wasn't just this homogeneous group that just decided at one time to do one thing. Everyone had their own separate reasons, many different reasons for going up to the north, and many hidden reasons as well for going up to the north. But those reasons were there. And what I really wanted to investigate and really wanted this novel to be was the idea, again, looking at hope, looking at a lot of the faith that went into this journey for a lot of people, and the idea, again, of that journey itself being so profound, how little of it is either captured or discussed, and how much of it is just that idea of it's better to just leave those things there than to take them with us. And to really make sure that, again, I kept people in that train or on that journey as they're actually telling the story.
Sure. Do you mind telling us your family's connection or anything? Would you?
Yeah. No, so they came up from South Carolina, up to the Buffalo area for Bethlehem Steel, which was, again, the idea that they needed bodies and that the steel mills, and so everyone was coming up for that. But everyone, they, again, had their different reasons. They wanted either to escape something, or to hope for something, or to look for something where they heard of, or they heard stories about how much better things were in the north. They heard stories about how different things were in the north, or they heard stories about how, if not better, or if not an improvement, then at least a different challenge, and one that they could adapt to. Right? And just the idea of all of that being there, that place being one in which hope can be realized, was something that was really powerful and unifying in that sense.
Do you still feel a pull? I'm thinking about Jean Toomer's novella of sorts, Cain. Do you still feel a pull to the South? Did your relatives speedways with them and all of that?
Exactly, all of it. I think that connection was so strong still there, right? Food, culture, sayings, disappointments, things that expectations. August Wilson and a lot of his plays brings that out so well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah, it just brings that out really so well. And just those ideas of what the South was, what the North could be for them. But yes, the connection is still as strong, right? Again, so many different aspects, so many different sayings, so many different stories that I heard about things that happened down there, so many different ways in which there was the connection to people there that they may not have heard from in a while, or wanting to go back to visit, wanting to go back to retire, wanting to go back to live, wanting to revisit what they thought that their history there was. So the connection between the northern community and the southern community is just so, it's just intrinsic. It's so there. But even though they may not have visited or seen each other for a while, the connection is still strong. And even now, when I go back up there to the Buffalo area, it's still there. It's still so much there.
We have some questions lining up, but I want to ask one more.
Sure, please.
I've been thinking a lot about it. You have been very active as a playwright, having your plays, produced all over the place. Where did you particularly lean on your skills as a playwright and writing the novella? Was it blocking a scene? Was it moving characters through space? Was it dialogue? Where do you feel like you really relied on your skill set?
All of those. So as far as blocking a scene, you have to think about how one scene is going to lead to the next and what each scene accomplishes. That's something I think playwriting really helped me with, was the idea of every scene within a play has to have a purpose and a way in which it's going to drive either the audience's knowledge of a character or the momentum of the play. So really thinking about the train itself being a factor, time being a factor because of the train, but just does this one scene, and it may be a scene in which the characters are simply walking. It may be a scene where the characters are driving to another location. But how does that inform the narrative that's going to happen next? And at the same time, what can be done to really heighten that sense of tension that's going to happen moving forward? So really, playwriting helped me with that, and as well dialogue. This is a first-person narrative work, so you really don't get into the others' perspectives as much. But through their actions, through what they say, through what they don't say, through what they don't want to discuss, one piece of dialogue that I think really my playwriting helped with was when the violent scene that you mentioned, when they get back to the train, what Davinian says about that. Or doesn't say about that, or how he relates to that, I think gives insight into who he is as a person, and as well what Carvel does, and as thing, and how he talks about that also relates to who he is as a person. A lot of the dialogue with Lana, really, I wanted to be pointed in a way in which she's able to see through a lot of what was happening around her and a lot of these men that she's traveling with, but at the same time give insights into her character, who she is, what's important to her. So I think all of those aspects really did help out when crafting the novella. So what was beneficial, what I really liked about having the novella, was that you did have the idea of getting into a lot of internal monologue or with Minister without breaking the stride of the narrative as much. But I did rely a lot on that playwriting experience to actually get the other characters in mind as well too, and flesh them out also.
Sure. I'm not going to ask you which one you thought, I'm going to do this now. We'll leave that alone. I don't want to infringe on your playwriting duties and reputation. We have a question. Donna Joe from Memphis, the Novel Bookstore. Donna Joe asks, my question is, did this start out as a novella, or did it start out as a story that had more to add in order to complete the story? Was this something that you have had in your mind to write about, and then your research skills took over? Minister is a great name. So the essence of the question, did you set out to write a novella?
Yes. So this was something I think that had to be in its framework, and I don't think it would have worked as a novel because, again, just the length. And I wanted to make sure it was compact enough to get all of the characters and get at the audience inside of that one stifling car, and with these 4 people on this one-day journey, enough for that. But I think that yes, it started out for me as a novella. I never really envisioned it to be a play. Others have mentioned before, like, you should turn this into a play. So that may be the next step. But when I started out, thanks. As I started out, it was a novella, and part of my creative process as well was just given this length, I could put all the pages up on the walls of my house. So I had every page, I'll pass it all over so I could go by and see, okay, is this scene needed? Is this line needed? Is this section here needed? And take them out, cross out, put things back and as necessary for the work. So yeah, this started out as a novella for me, and I always had that design of it being so.
I just try to think of plays that are set on trains, and I thought of Amiri Baraka's Dutchman. That
Yes.
was the first one that came to mind, and my playwriting knowledge is relatively limited. I can't think of others. So I think this would make a fantastic stage play. So
Thanks.
Benjamin asks, was the title The Salt Fields always there, or did you have a working title? And why did you decide, I won't tell how it kind of the story of the salt fields at the end, but were you always hoping for that circularity in the title, because it takes you back to the South with that title at the end? Were you always hoping for that? And can you tell us about the choice of the title?
Yeah, the title came pretty quickly. The way my process usually is, I write longhand, at least for a first section of it. So I have one of those 3-ring binders, and I have like one section of it of a 3-subject notebook, and I have to fill that up before I know I can start. Like, I don't have that, I know that it's not ready to start, and I need to put it away for maybe a couple of years. This one it took about 14, 15 years to do. So it took a while to actually get going on it. But it is something where the title itself did come fairly quickly in the process. I have a list of titles sometimes I go through, but this one, just that idea of it was something that I wanted to, again, circle back to and have being prominent as people are reading it.
And then another question from Donna Joe. She says, did you think about the theme of hope that your characters went through compared to what we are going through on a different level now?
It was finished or completed a little bit prior, but hopefully it does resonate. Like, hopefully the idea of hope and the idea of what comes next, or whatever comes next, being an improvement, and how hope changes, right? The nature of hope is there can be still some disappointments in there, but the nature of hope actually comes through, and hope may change because of that, and that's fine. And I think that what hopefully the book shows is that the nature of what these characters hope for may change. The nature of what they're looking for may change, but that kernel of hope, that kernel of what they can accomplish, that kernel of things being better outside or where they can get to resonates. So hopefully, again, as you read it, that does come through.
I think it does, and I think that these are 4 characters who, in some ways, unfortunately, would still feel very much the same way in our contemporary society.
Yeah.
I could see them on this train car having very much the same conversations, and maybe not experiencing some of the things they experience as viscerally, but still psychologically. I think many of these things that they confront are still with us, like it or not.
I think still resonate, and just that idea of that struggle, right? I think that you can measure the struggle in steps, or you can measure it in miles, but you measure it in what you've accomplished, but the distance still to go. So you still have to say, okay, it's still always moving forward, step after step after step. And as long as you're moving forward in that fashion, these characters are going to have tribulations if they were set in the 80s or they were set in today. But that idea of, if we keep moving forward, there's going to be something there for us.
Like the train, right?
Yep, exactly.
You can't get off once you're on. It's not waiting for anybody.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. And
thank you.
I encourage everybody to go to the chat and look at the link to the upcoming events that we've got coming up in May. This is a beautiful novella. It is about a time, but it is as timely now as it was when it was set in the mid 1940s. So, Stacy, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon there on the
Thank you.
Night is setting in here in North Carolina. But it's been a pleasure, and I hope
it's been my pleasure as well. Thank you, everyone. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Good night, everybody.
Good night.